What I have done with this is I've just mounted it quickly onto some wadding and a backing fabric. Now, if you are going to quilt it, I would pin or fuse or tack. On this size piece of work, you really don't need to do anything more than pin. And notice my pins are all going outwards, because I feel if you put pins in the way that your hands would smooth the fabric, that's pushing the fibers out. So that action pushes the fibers outwards. This action pushes the fibers inwards, and you actually want them to go out. So I would always put my pins in any quilt going towards the outside edge. If you're going to do quilting, I would start off with doing something in the middle, and this is where you could do your decorative stitch. And remember, you'd either have to now put your walking foot on, or you need to use your free motion foot, as I've just used. You could do something wonderfully fancy. You could just go around the lines. If you've got this particular design, you might just want to outline, rather than stitch in the ditch, the dominant swirly bits. If you're working on the one that I had earlier, which we've gone walk about now, the new design, what I would do with that when it came to quilting is probably just go round these bits and again outline, because if you outline and you wobble, it doesn't notice. If you stitch in the ditch and you wobble, boy, does it notice. So do a little bit of quilting, don't do too much. Before you come to bind it, you absolutely must sew round the outside edge to anchor the outside layers together. So the top fabric, the wadding, and the backing fabric. And I would do this either using my walking foot or using the free motion foot. I've just gone round it with the free motion foot. And the reason for that is if you use the regular presser foot, you will get creep. One of these layers will just creep and it all bunches up. The walking foot will stop it, because the walking foot will massage the fabrics through because of its two sets of feed dogs. It's got its own feed dogs and the machine's feed dogs, and they massage the fabric through. The free motion foot is good because it doesn't sit on the fabrics and you can just push the material round. And it doesn't matter if you wobble, because this will either be covered with the binding. Now, the binding on anything that is circular has to be cut on the bias. There is no way around it. You've got to cut it on the bias. To cut fabric on the bias is decide on the material you're going to use. This piece just happens to be to hand. Open the fabric out, and it's irrelevant whether you have it on the right side or the wrong side. You will have on your rotary cutting ruler a 45-degree line. It's on just about every rotary cutting ruler in the world. There is my 45-degree line. There. You also see the lights overhead, sorry about that. Putting the ruler with the 45-degree line down the edge of the fabric. So here is my 45-degree line. Put it on the edge of the fabric. I've got my fabric opened out and I'm back to the same rule before. Fabric's on the right, the ruler's actually coming in from the left. Position that 45-degree line and you're now going to cut up the edge of the ruler. Because I've not got a very long ruler, what I'm going to do is, having made an initial cut, is slightly part the fibers, slide the ruler down, that hitch it up a bit because it's about to come off the mat, and just continue with my cut. Once you've made a 45-degree cut, it is rather silly to try and wobble your way along and keep cutting on such a long piece of fabric. So what I tend to do, masking tape everywhere, is fold this edge over and fold it in half like that. Now, I tend to be a person who prefers single binding. I don't like double binding because it gets awfully thick and uses a heck of a lot of fabric. So I'm just going to use a piece of binding that is about 1 3/4 inches wide. If you wanted to do it double, then you're looking at least 2.5 inches. So going on the 1 3/4 inches, fabric on the right, ruler comes in on the left, and cut off 1 3/4 inches. 1.5 is a bit tight, 2 inches is a bit too much. Let me cut a couple of pieces because then I can explain how you join them together. So we've cut a bias corner. I've cut off, in my case, 2 1 3/4 inch strips. You'll probably need some more, but these need to be joined together to go round the edge of my circle. When it comes to joining biases together, that is what we want to achieve, a nice straight line. And this is where the word right comes in. Turn the fabrics over and look at the right side. That's the first word, right. Okay, this is the right side of the fabric. Whenever we join 2 pieces of material together, we always take our 2 pieces of material and we put them together on the raw edge that we're going to join. We line up the raw edge. I want to join it on that raw edge. So put the 2 raw edges together. And the second you put the 2 raw edges together you want to join, you get a right angle. But we haven't had enough rights because we have nowhere to actually sew. Because if you were to stitch this now, when you open it out, you will get a step. And the reason for that is you haven't allowed for the seam allowance. So you now need to slide one of these bits of fabric up the other until you've actually got, and I'll raise this to the camera, 2 more right angles. So you've got a right angle here and a right angle there. And your stitching goes in through this gap and out through that gap. It is irrelevant how much you slide it up. I mean, that would be a bit daft. But your stitching would go in from that corner and out through that corner. You forget your seam allowance, you go corner to corner, crack to crack. So if you don't slide it up, you ain't got no corners. So slide one up t'other. Depending on the angle of your bias, sometimes you're going in the other direction when you slide down, but you put your raw edges together and then you slide. When you've got 2 corners, crack to crack, you go corner to corner, straight across. So let me just do that. Put the darning foot on my machine, so change my foot. Because one of the few advantages of Bernina, feet changing is quick. Stitch less than one. Slightly wobbly. And you can see I've gone crack to crack. When you open it out, you've got a nice straight line. So if you can remember the word right, and you can remember right angles, and that you go crack to crack, you will have no problem in joining bias strips together. Once you've got your bias strip together, the trick is to start and leave a section unattached. And I'm going to stitch this on using round about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'll have my needle in the middle and possibly slightly over to the left-hand edge of my presser foot. You can have smaller if you wish, but you've got to allow enough for the fabric to go up and over to the back and leave you something to turn under. So round about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance will do this nicely. Right, allow me to do a bit. So remember, you've got to leave a tail to begin with. When you're putting the bias on, feed the bias in, don't pin it. Because the problem if you pin it, you tend to work to the pin. Let it go happily. I'll only do a bit. So you can see I've sewn it on and I've left a tail. And I just let it happen. I just go round. Just don't have the dog sitting on the other end or it underneath your chair, because then you'll pull it. But if you pin it, the trouble is you tend to stretch it as you pull it. And I find it's better to just let it happen. The way that you join the ends together is like this. So I'm just going to cut this bit off and pretend I'm coming round to here again. So let's just do this little bitty. You will go all the way round, keeping to the same seam allowance, all the way round. And stop. stop a short distance away from the start. So there's my tail end there, and that. Now you have a choice. You can either spend a considerable amount of time trying to fiddle and stitch these on the bias, or you can do this. And to do this is fold over the starting end. Take this end and lay it inside and simply trim it off. So I've folded over my beginning end, it's left slightly too long a tail, and then lie this on top, because when you fold it back, it'll look as though it's on the bias. And to be quite honest, it's a heck of a lot easier than trying to put tails together and join with the bias. And that little bias ruler is highly expensive for what it doesn't do. And I never did manage to work it out how it actually worked properly. But there is a gadget sold by both Easy Quilting and indeed by famous Jennie Rayment of Missouri quilt fame. And then you go back to where you started. So you can see I've sewn straight past here and back to where I began. And when I open it out, that is pretty neat and tidy. And I haven't had to fuss around with trying to join ends together. Once you've got the binding on the entire thing, before you roll it back, trim off the excess fabric. Trim it right off. Just do that little bit for now. And then all we do then is fold it up and over to the back. And I would press it now, turn it to the back, turn the raw edge under, and slip stitch it by hand in place. In the right place there. Pin it. So pull it firmly over, turn it under, and then slip stitch it by hand in place all the way around. Now that's one way of doing it, and it works perfectly well. If you're a lady who likes to do it on the machine, and I tend to do a lot of my bindings on the machine, then what I would do then is I put the binding on the back and I reverse the procedure. I then bring it forwards, up and over and onto the front, turning it under, and then I will machine using some form of perhaps slightly decorative stitch along here, knowing that if I wobble a bit and it shows on the back, it won't matter because it's on the back. Now, are you all fairly clear on how the binding would work? So I think this method of folding one over, take those pins out again, folding the edge over and then laying the other one inside actually works quite neatly. Remember, you've got to cut the fabric out on the bias and stitch it to either the front or the back, trim your wadding off and then over, and I would press it at that stage. Fold it to the back and I then turn it to the back and I press it again. And then I just simply turn the raw edge under and spend a happy evening slip stitching it in place.